The same way a musician has to practice scales in order to be better at playing songs and music, anyone who wants to speak has to practice their stories. And stories are the notes that get woven in and out of a public speaking presentation that make it really sing. And in order to practice your stories, the first thing you have to do is remember those stories. I'm often coaching people in over at Honestly Human to help them remember their stories. And the way to do that is through the use of story prompts. If you just sit down and go, okay, I want to remember my stories, it's kind of hard to pull them out of thin air. And this is where having story prompts to use can be very useful. And one common story prompt I use myself, and that's very, very simple for you to use yourself, is to simply start writing down places you've spent a lot of time. At the top of that list could just be places you've lived, maybe places you went to school, or places you repeatedly went on vacation with your family or on your own when you were older, places you've worked. So just write down a list of places where you spent time. And then when you put your attention on those places, what will naturally happen is memorable events will pop into your mind. And often the reason those events are memorable is because there was a good story attached to them. For instance, I was going through today, just doing my practice of following some story prompts, and I started to look at the places I lived, and I remembered one town we lived in when I was a kid. And the moment I remembered this house, the scene that popped into my mind was sitting at the dinner table with my family. My parents were on the far side of the table. I was on the opposite side with my brother and I. And I think it was in school, one of my classmates had showed me this little trick where if you get hold of someone's finger in the right way, you can basically kind of put them in a hold where they can't get out of the way you're holding their finger. And so I was showing this to my brother, and I had caught his finger in this certain position, and I was enjoying this, power that I was having over him. And my brother was saying, "Ow, let go, that hurts." And I was being a jerk at 12 years of age or however old I was at that time, and I wouldn't let go. And so I was pretty focused on this control I was exerting over my brother. And then suddenly, out of the blue, a hamburger hit my face. And I don't know, I had no warning or no clue, or I didn't know where this hamburger came from. But all I knew was that as the hamburger hit my face and the majority of the hamburger fell onto my plate, the bun had stuck to my face. So one half of the hamburger bun had stuck to my face, and I was sitting there in total shock with one half of a hamburger stuck to my face. And I looked around in shock, and my brother, my brother was looking at me in shock, and my mother was looking at me in shock, and my father, who had thrown his hamburger at me in his frustration that I was hurting my brother, and he was across the table and didn't have a clear, efficient way to intervene, had picked up his hamburger and threw it at me. Now, my father did not lose his temper very often at all, but when he did, it got all of our attention. And this particular act really got our attention because it was so unusual. And I remember sitting there, all of us in shock for about the count of three. And then we all burst into gales of laughter because it was such an unexpected, I guess it was out of relief as well, but it was also so unexpected and so out of the blue in such a strange way of intervening in the midst of a conflict. So I remember the only reason I remembered that story is because I went through and used this prompt of place, just jogging my own memory by putting my attention on a place that I remember. And then in the end, just by doing that, I have this memory of this story, which is essentially about a strong action that was taken by somebody, in this case, my father. And when strong, memorable action is taken by someone, it's usually propped up by that person's values. And my father had a tremendous degree of concern for people being treated well and treated fairly. And it was really upsetting to him when anybody would manipulate, control, overpower another person just because they had some form of leverage over them and was not treating them fairly, which is why he was so set off by what I was doing with my brother. So, in this way, this is how, just with a simple story prompt like place, you can trace back a memory. And if something stands out, it's usually for a reason. And once it jumps out at you, if you explore that story, you'll be able to get to what that underlying meaning, that underlying reason is. And it makes for a good story. I have lots of other story prompts I'm going to be offering in the future. So I hope you'll sign up, stick around, and I'll let you know when I've got another story prompt to share. Good luck finding, taking an inventory of, and telling your own stories.